Hello and welcome to another episode of the AAIM High Podcast, standing for Asian American Inspirers in Management. Today's guest is Bill Tung, an expert in international sales and development. Mr. Tung has had a remarkable career working at many huge companies and playing crucial roles in their international success. With expertise in starting, expanding, and managing profitable businesses across diverse markets and cultures, Mr. Tung has proven to be a distinguished leader. He served as the Vice President of International Sales, Market Expansion, and Organization Development at Columbia Sportswear for over 10 years, overseeing $1 billion in sales across multiple regions. During this time, he led Columbia to achieve the #1 market share in China and expanded its footprint to markets such as Tokyo, Seoul, South Africa, and Israel, where he saw the business grow by 600%. Mr. Tung has also held leadership positions at New Balance and Fanatics, where he helps scale operations globally. Currently, he is the General Manager of International at the 47 brand, where he drives international strategy and market development. So please help me in welcoming Bill Tung to the podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Real honor to spend time with you. Thank you.
Okay, well, to start off, first, let's talk about maybe your childhood and upbringing. Because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing, because as an Asian American, a lot of the ideas and values instilled from you contribute to your success later on in life. So for the first question, could you maybe just explain your childhood situation growing up? Where did you grow up? Did you have any siblings? What were family dynamics like?
Yeah, sure, Ben. My parents were from Shanghai, and they escaped to Hong Kong during the Communist Revolution in 1949. And so that's where I was born. They met in Hong Kong, and I was born in Hong Kong, as were my two older brothers. At a very early age when I was 4 years old. So our family immigrated here to the United States, and we settled in the northern suburbs of Philadelphia, of all places. So we were out in the burbs. At that time, in the late 60s, not many Asian Americans, to say the least. So growing up through elementary school, junior high school, maybe there were about 5 families in the northern suburbs there. It wasn't really until later on in high school, a lot of Taiwanese families came into the area, and those families, their fathers or mothers were doctors, engineers in high tech, or what was high tech at the time. But no, it was a pretty typical American upbringing. Played a whole bunch of different sports, and so it was a good time.
Yeah, and since your parents were immigrants, and you were too, what pressure did you feel to conform to certain expectations or like the broader community?
Yeah, it's interesting. My parents, my father, was a businessman, and so he owned and managed a factory in Hong Kong, as the family did in Shanghai previously. So they were not academics, working professionals that way. So it was a situation where my father was one of the first astronaut fathers, if you will, where he really stayed in Hong Kong, managed the family business there, and my mother was raising 3 boys on her own there. So academically, yeah. So certainly, the opportunity to come to America was always instilled in us as this is really the land of opportunity and opportunity to live the American dream. But certainly there was no pretense of you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be this. So certainly, while academics was important, I wouldn't say it was the end all and be all of everything.
Yeah. How did your parents' experiences influence your perspective on work and success?
Yeah, absolutely. You go off and get it. Nobody's going to give you anything. Nobody owes you anything. And so whatever you're going to make in your life, you need to drive that path. And my mother was one of being just very fiercely independent, that you need to stand on your own 2 feet. And so here we will give you this opportunity to educate you but certainly no understanding. The decision was ours. And so my oldest brother, oddly enough, did become a doctor, although my mother didn't want him to be a doctor. So he did become a doctor. My second oldest brother ended up going back to Hong Kong and being a businessman there. But there was no direction from the sense. My parents were not tiger parents. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
certainly I was kind of fortunate in that sense, or maybe unfortunate, but fortunate in the sense that I was allowed to find my own path at an early age.
Yeah. And as we move on to the education and early career part of the podcast, because your career today is so impressive, I just wanted to know how you got to that point. So first off, like when you were in high school and college, did you know what you wanted to do as a career path? Did you know you wanted to do international business?
Yes, at a really early age, I would say even in
Mm.
high school, I was like, okay, I want to be an international business person. I wasn't a techie. I wasn't going to be a doctor. I didn't think I was going to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a business person, and something involved in international business. And having had the opportunity to travel a bit in an early age to Europe and to Asia, and then my father being an international business person, I thought, hey, that would be an interesting pursuit, and certainly just intellectually, I enjoyed dealing with people and meeting people from different parts of the world. So I did study finance at Penn State, just for the lack of anything other. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll be an international investment banker. That sounds like a really good career, make a lot of money. But I ended up graduating from Penn State and then basically immediately going to getting a graduate degree in international business at a place called Thunderbird, at the American Graduate School of International Management in Arizona. So that really put me into an environment that was very much about international business. The program, the studies, all my cohorts were very globally, internationally business minded. So that was home for me. And then from there, I was going to find my path, whether it was international investment banking or some other international business career.
Mm-hmm. And why did that interest spark? Was it because you traveled a lot and like meeting people internationally, or like
Yeah,
what was that reason?
absolutely. And I think it was just, I was really fascinated when I went to Europe in junior high school, and I saw Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Levi's, and so, how did these American brands get over here? I thought that was an interesting. What was the mechanics of what were the logistics? How did that happen? And traveling to Hong Kong at an early age, going back to Hong Kong, all these international brands, how did they move from their home country to the other markets? So I thought that was an interesting puzzle to figure out and learn about.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, what did your transition look like from after graduate school at Thunderbird to your first job? Was that at the Rockport company or was that
Yeah,
somewhere else?
no, it was actually somewhere else. I went right after undergraduate, so I was one of the youngest cohorts. Most of my cohorts were a good 4 or 5 years older than me, so they had working experience. I had none whatsoever. But certainly as graduation was looming, you're sort of scouring the career services department there and trying to get as many interviews as possible. And I had one job offer on graduation day, and I was very fortunate because a lot of kids didn't. But it was for a company based in Long Island, New York, called Cybex. That was a manufacturer of fitness equipment and physical therapy equipment. But the responsibility was for Asia Pacific sales. And I thought, okay, it's an international job. It's not in finance. So I had focused on international finance when I was at Thunderbird. But it was either that or being unemployed. So I took the job and I went to Long Island, New York. And for about 4 years there, I was in charge of setting up distributors and doing sales to fitness clubs and hospitals, from Tokyo to Mumbai down to Sydney. So Asia Pac was my part of the world, but I was based in Long Island, New York. So it was great fun. I got paid peanuts, but I was absolutely, it was fantastic because, and I would go on 3-week business trips to Tokyo, Seoul, Beijing, Taipei, Mumbai, Singapore, Jakarta, Sydney, and then I'd come back home, and then the next month I would do it all over again. So as a young person, I started working when I was 22, 23. It was a real adventure, quite frankly. So it was really getting to see the world on the company's dime, and meeting people from across the region. So living in Long Island, New York, as a single person wasn't a lot of fun socially. So unfortunately, I ended up then getting a job based in Hong Kong at Prince Racket Sports Tennis.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, if you're a tennis player. And so certainly had a small office in Hong Kong responsible for Asia Pac sales and marketing. So I moved to Hong Kong, and that was great fun being involved in tennis and badminton in Southeast Asia and squash. So that was it was very new to me being involved in consumer products and retail, and so that was a very eye-opening experience. And so I did that for about 3 years, and then back in the 90s in Hong Kong was really a booming period. It seemed as if there were two jobs for every one person. And so I was interviewing with Reebok and Nike at that time, and Reebok just gave me the job offer first, and they had a little small brand called Rockport, and so they said, hey, we want to develop this business in Asia. So I started that, set up distributors, set up subsidiaries around the region. And then they moved. The company thought, "Hey, Japan's a big market for us. Why don't you move to Tokyo?" So we moved from Hong Kong to Tokyo. My wife and my small child, and then we had an opportunity to go manage Europe for the brand. So off to London we went, and so yeah, that was big fun.
Yeah, and when you were at Prince Racket Sports, because I'm just like interested in tennis, what did your job look like for like trying to grow that and like distribute like I don't know, like the rackets and all the equipment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at the time, there was already an existing business there. So they had distributors in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand. Nothing was in China or in India just yet. So it was really working with those distributors, those partners around the region, and developing the product, developing sales network. And the badminton was the interesting part, because certainly if you know badminton, certainly in Asia, it's a real sport. It's an Olympic sport. It's been an Olympic sport since '96, Summer Olympics in Atlanta. And but the head office was in Princeton, New Jersey. And the American badminton is something you play in the backyard at a picnic with a beer in one hand and the racket in the other hand. But in Asia, it was eye-opening going to these tournaments in Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur. It was, wow, these guys are real serious athletes. And so we were trying to develop that business and develop the products, the rackets for that. But that was a challenge, because it was very much dominated by a company very well, Yonex. So
Yeah. And then how did you transition from Reebok to Columbia Sportswear? Because you spent a lot of your career there after.
Yeah, I spent 8 years at Rockport Reebok. Reebok was having its challenges, as there was this other brand based in Portland, Oregon, that was really dominating. I forget the name of that company. I think it has a swoosh on the shoe. But interestingly enough, just through my network, the incumbent who was heading up the international sales at Columbia was departing. I got an opportunity to interview with the CEO, and never been to Portland, Oregon in my life, and so they hired me. So moved from Hong Kong to Portland, and so that's basically where we raised the kids at that time.
Yeah, and can you maybe explain your role as vice president of Columbia Sportswear, like international, and like what your day-to-day tasks or roles actually look like?
Sure, absolutely. When I joined Columbia Sportswear in 2003, there was already a subsidiary that based in France that ran that ran Europe. There was a subsidiary in Canada, and there was one in Japan and Korea. And so those GMs reported into myself, and I reported to Tim Boyle, the CEO, president of the company. So, first and foremost, it's the revenue, right? So you got to hit your numbers. You're budgeting. but also you're managing people. So you got to make sure you have the right people in the right places for those jobs. And so I was based in Portland, Oregon. So certainly traveling a great deal across Europe and Japan and Korea, where we had offices. But also one of the big roles was expanding the business, because Columbia at the time was not in China, was not in Southeast Asia, was not in South Africa, Israel. It was just starting in Russia. So a lot of it was hiring people onto my team. I'm not doing it all myself. Is to go off and find distributors in these far-flung markets. So I had a great deal of leeway because like here's this big open market around the world for us to go fill in and find customers. So so that was very much setting the strategy, and then tactically implementing that strategy. And certainly what you do in one country is going to be very different in another country. So in Japan, it's very much, it was at the time for Columbia very much of a wholesale market, selling to department stores and sporting goods retailers. But over in Korea, it is very much of a retail market where there's no real wholesale to department stores. You're actually leasing space in the Shinsegaes and the Hyundai department stores there, and then finding retailers to set up stores for you. So it was a different strategy country by country.
Yeah, and because it's so different, could you maybe explain a couple of like what those processes look like for like expanding into like, let's say, Japan or like Korea?
Well, I think the first thing for a lot of American companies that are looking to expand outside of the United States, the first step is usually, if you're a small company, is you're usually not setting up a wholly owned subsidiary from the beginning, because it's very capital intensive. You need to hire people, you need to rent an office, set up the company, get a warehouse set up. So you're really, the first step is to find a distributor, if you will, or an agent to represent your company. And so that's a matter of vetting and interviewing different companies that are in your sphere, in your industry, in your space, and really just finding that right company that's a good fit, that's a company that's well capitalized, they're not representing any competitors, and then it's a real good cultural fit for your brand, and real understanding of what the same common objectives are. And how do you do that? It's really through your network and your experience of and knowing who to speak with.
Mm-hmm. And what was like your favorite part of leading Columbia's expansion into regions like China, Tokyo, Seoul? Like, was it traveling?
It was. Well, that is the challenge. When you, as an international business person, have an international job and you're trying to raise a family, because at that time we had 2 young kids in Portland, Oregon, it really requires you to have a spouse that is fully supportive of you being away for a good 30-40% of the time. So without that, it's really hard to have that type of a life and that type of a business career, quite frankly. But so what was enjoyable was really just being a very entrepreneurial spirit of doing things different, doing things new, and venturing into new markets and expanding retail, and really understanding the different consumer profiles and cultural aspects of each of the countries, because you can't cookie cut it. It's like what you did in the States, you cannot implement one for one in every country around the world. So what you're doing in Russia is going to be this way. What you're doing in China, something different. What you're doing in Australia is a little bit different as well.
Mm-hmm. And because all the places are so different, like, how would you adjust like your strategy, I guess, based on like what country you're going to?
And really, the first thing is listen and understand and ask a lot of questions, and not come in with this presumption of what is it going to be like. So that's speaking to customers on the ground, consumers on the ground, your business partners on the ground, and understanding what is needed to be successful. And that doesn't mean you throw away your brand strategy, because your brand strategy is going to be global. But how you implement that country by country is going to be a little bit different. So there's this cliche, that think global, act local, right? Mm. So I think that was sort of very much my mantra in doing business around the world.
Yeah. And what was the most challenging maybe country or region to expand into?
China for sure. And we were fortunate because we used our Hong Kong business partners to start with. to expand into China, but there's a lot of regulatory issues of selling apparel in China, and it's not so much of a barrier. It applies to Chinese apparel brands as well, and it's very much regulatory, safety, health regulations that you need to have all your products tested before you bring that to market in China. So that is, it's not insurmountable, of course, because every brand's doing business in China today. But there was just a lot of bureaucracy and red tape to get that started.
And then what was like a specific challenge that you faced at your time at Columbia, either with China, and like how did learning from that experience help you with expanding into other countries and your jobs moving forward?
Yeah, well, you're always going to be susceptible to global macroeconomic political issues. So certainly as we went into recession in 08, 09 from the real estate collapse in the U.S., that really had a big impact globally as well. So, you always, those are things you can't control. But the things, and Euro's going to, foreign currency fluctations, collapsing economies, the Russian ruble, it turned into a disaster. Greece went into a tailspin with its issues as well. So you're always going to be dealing with macro global issues as well. But some of those challenges that you need to focus on the factors that you can control, right? And so a lot of the challenges are sometimes internal within your company as well. Is that, okay, we need to develop specific products for Japan, Korea, and China, not just from a size and fit on the apparel, but in the design of those products, because the consumers are different. It was about putting together a business plan and justifying the investment to hire designers and product managers that were based in Tokyo, based in Seoul, based in Shanghai, and just all the logistic and operational issues of coming up with a local collection that was more suitable to the local consumers.
Yeah, and as you managed so much money in sales and expanded Columbia's business by so much, what do you think was the key to successfully growing the brand at such a huge scale?
Around the world, we face competition, primarily with the North Face brand. That was really a primary, because wherever we were, they were there as well. And that was really the primary competitor. And then you've got local country competitors as well. You really need to have the commitment from senior management and the board that you're going to be making a commitment to invest and expand internationally. It's not a one-man show. I had a team of people with me in Portland, Oregon, that was flying around the world. I didn't go to every country, of course. So I had people that were managing Europe, South America, Asia as well. But it was also, you need to have the senior management willing to make the investment, and the senior team that's willing to cooperate, because you're relying on finance, you're relying on HR, you're relying on product, you're on design, all of your cohorts. It's international sales and business development is not a standalone business. It incorporates everybody at headquarters to cooperate and collaborate.
And then after Columbia Sportswear, you went on to like Fanatics and New Balance, correct?
Yeah, after almost 13 years at Columbia, my kids were going to school in Connecticut, and this opportunity at New Balance came along to basically do the same thing. It was head of international sales, to be based in Boston. So after 13 years, or 12 and a half years, my wife and I decided that we were going to make this big change and move over to New Balance. And so that was an interesting opportunity to get into athletic footwear. And again, New Balance at that time was they're very well established. They already had subsidiaries around the world, distributors set up around the world. So it was really managing the process as opposed to this global expansion, because it was already pretty global business at that time.
What about Fanatics? Because you went to Fanatics too, and did you do more global expansion there? Or...
Yeah, that was very much of a startup, because as you may know, the Fanatics business is pretty complex, but primarily they are the licensee in apparel and headwear for the NFL, the MLB, NHL, NBA, and all different properties. So it was, how do we take that and stand that up around the world? And they had acquired the license for Nike NFL and Nike MLB. So they acquired the rights, but they didn't have the mechanism to sell around the world. So my task was to set up the whole sales network, primarily focused on Europe and Japan and Australia. So yeah, there was a lot of challenges there because it was a startup, and it was internally a bit challenging because it was almost a business that was a sideshow, sort of out of sight, out of mind. Because Fanatics was very much growing at a very rapid rate here in the United States. It didn't really have a lot of time to focus on its international markets.
Yeah, and then now as we move on to more of your current career at the 47 brand, how did you make that transition to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I'll be very frank. At Fanatics, something called COVID came along in 2020, and that put a stop to all type of business. So I found myself not having a job. And so in 2020, 21, 22, I really, it's like, well, sort of everything stopped around the world. So I thought I would, then give my services, go into the consulting world. So I did that for a little bit and helping companies with their international expansion strategy, really just leveraging my experience over the years and my network. And so I worked with a few companies to develop their strategies, and that was fun. But it was time to get a real job, and fortunately here in Boston, there's a small little family-owned business called 47 Brand, and they're a competitor of Fanatics basically because they also had licenses for the four major U.S. sport leagues and NCAA and NASCAR. So the task really for the last 2 years that I've been at 47 is to grow that business. And to work with its distributors and subsidiaries around the world and bring that business to life.
Mm-hmm. And then what does a typical work week look like for you at the 47 brand trying to grow that business?
Well, it's working with the current markets that we have and certainly making sure that we are doing the right thing from a product standpoint, a sales standpoint, and that our distributor partners are focused on our brand and expanding that into the local marketplace. But this business is very much, in the world of licensing, you're very much restricted from the rights that you have from Major League Baseball or the NBA or the NFL. So we don't have those rights in all countries around the world. We have it for Major League Baseball and the NHL, but not for the NFL or the NBA. So it really it'll differ region by region as to which rights that you have, but it's about managing that sales process and making sure that you're hitting your targets and your goals that you've budgeted and signed up for to senior management.
Yeah, and then what opportunities do you see for the 47 brand in expanding its presence globally?
Yeah, well, last summer we were acquired by a company called New Era, which is based in Buffalo, New York. So we're going through integration with them right now. It's a much larger organization. They're about 4 times larger than 47. They're much more developed around the world. So right now my role is working with my counterparts in New Era and integration, collaboration. Say, for example, we in Mexico, they have a subsidiary, we have a subsidiary, so we're in the process of how are we leveraging their much bigger resources and experience there to ramp up 47. We're making a transition in Japan, and my colleagues in Europe are doing the same over there.
Mm-hmm. With such like a wealth of experience, what would you say is like the most critical factor in successfully expanding a brand into international markets?
Listening.
Yeah.
Understanding. There are many, not so much brands, a lot of retailers, brick and mortar retailers that have tried to expand outside of their home market and have failed miserably, whether they're American retailers, Japanese retailers, Russian retailers, European retailers, because there's this mindset that you're very successful at what you do in your home market, and you just try to cookie cut and paste that same strategy and that same tactic in another country without really listening and understanding the local consumers, the buying culture. So really the most important thing is to listen and to understand what is required to be successful in that particular country. Because you're no longer, you're taking your business and your brand from your home country and trying to implement that somewhere else. Simply cookie cutting everything is very naive, if not ignorant, and lazy, quite frankly. So it's about listening and finding out what is the right path to success.
Yeah, and looking back at your career, what was either like your favorite project or most rewarding project that you worked on?
Oh my, that's a very good question. There have been a whole bunch of exciting opportunities, and I think a few of them was really in Japan. We transitioned from simply just wholesaling to department stores and sporting good retailers to starting our own retail, Columbia stores, and so it started off very small. Senior management didn't want to invest in retail. We really thought that was the right path for the brand and for revenue. So we started off small, 1 store, 2 store, 3 stores. Hey, they're profitable. We're hitting our targets. And so we grew from a very small base to today. It's probably 40% of its revenue is directly controlled retail and e-commerce as well. But, expanding into China was really exciting as well because we were the first outdoor brand to break into China. We got there before the North Face and everybody else. So it was sort of virgin territory for us. The Nikes of the world, Adidas, Athletic was already in China, but in the world of outdoor apparel, we were the real pioneers to break into China. And we started off very, very small in Shanghai with a small little display in a department store, and we grew that to China. That would today I think is the largest single country for the company outside the United States.
Wow. And as we move on to our next part about like challenges and overcoming obstacles, this might apply to you a little bit less because you have been doing like international business, but what challenges have you felt being an Asian American leader in business, if you have faced any?
Yeah, it never occurred to me. It just like, this is the path that I'm going down, international business. I found myself into consumer products, into the sporting goods area, by luck, by chance, by karma, whatever it may be. But, as I rose through the ranks and moved up the corporate ladder, you realize that there's nobody here that looks like me or has a similar background that me. It was never a hindrance. It was never a barrier, quite frankly, of breaking through a bamboo ceiling. So I was very fortunate in that respect. But I understand certainly that there is there. I think it's important to realize though, you got to stay focused on what you want to do. What is your passion? And, if you're going to be in the corporate world, you got to realize there's no such thing as lifetime employment anywhere. So, you got to find what is that right opportunity for yourself. And if it doesn't work at company A, then you go to company B or company C. But as far as any active discrimination, no, I'm fortunate to say I don't think I encountered any from that standpoint.
Yeah, and what role has your cultural background played in shaping your leadership style and perspective as a business leader?
That's a really interesting question, Ben. Growing up, I was not an assertive person, and that was just my personality, the youngest of 3 boys, and so I think I had to learn to be assertive. And that's something that in my personal life and my professional life. So more importantly, in my professional life, is you got to go out and get it, and you need to ask for it. And I think that from a cultural standpoint, and I've said this to many people in the Asian American community, people like yourself, or in the early part of their career, I think what happens is that in an Asian family, Asian American family, it doesn't matter if you're Korean, Taiwanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, we are ingrained respect for our parents and our grandparents. That's just inherent in our culture, is that respect for that hierarchy. And that translates to the classroom. We are taught that you're going to respect your teachers and your professors. And somehow that translates into the workplace as well. And in American business, in the American corporate world, that really doesn't translate very well. So being humble and hardworking and quiet is a real disservice, quite frankly. And I think that's really the heart of Jane Hyun's book 20 years ago or so, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, is that you can retain your cultural identity, but just also be very conscious that those traits aren't always respected or even understood in corporate America. And so I think that's something that I had to learn is to be much more assertive. So my motto to everybody and to my kids really is to be bold and be brave. You need to step out and have a higher level of being assertive. And that's really, really important for, I think, our community who have grown up in a pretty traditional Asian culture family. Is that I'm not saying don't respect your bosses or the hierarchy at your company. You don't need to be a radical, but at the same time, you need to stand up for yourself because the whole point is that your professional working path, career path, is in your hands and your hands alone. And hopefully you'll have some great mentors along the way, but your career is not in the hands of the HR department. It's not in the hands of your boss. It's in the hands of yourself. And if you're just going to go along for the ride, then you'll find yourself probably not achieving your goals in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time, unless you're actively managing your career, where you want to go, what you want to be.
Mm-hmm. And as we move on to the last part of the podcast about advice and inspiration, I was wondering, what advice would you have for someone interested in going into international business when they're older?
Well, I would say this for students, whether you're in high school or if you're in college, my advice is this: get involved in your school, be actively involved, whether that's in sports or clubs or organizations. And it's not just to put something on your resume and your application so you can get into college. Okay, once you're into college, people think, oh, I need to build up my credentials so I can get a job. It's more than just that. It's really, when you're in school, high school and college, you're in this bubble, you're in this artificial environment. You can say it's not the real world. So you try to get as much real world experience as possible. So for myself, when I went to Penn State, I think I spent the first 2 years playing basketball. And nothing else. And then I sort of realized, boy, what a waste of time that was. And so I got actively involved in the school newspaper. I got actively involved in student government. And really, I so much regret. It's like, why didn't I do that earlier from day one? So I wasted 2 years playing basketball, just hanging out. But my last 2 years at Penn State were very, very active in getting very involved. So that doesn't mean being a member of 12 different clubs and organizations. That means picking those places that you want to spend your time and really doing a deep dive and having a management role, if you will, and being actively involved. Not so much just to put it on your application because I did this, but for your own benefit. I always told my kids, if you went to school and you were a straight A student and you did nothing else, you failed, in my book. Because college is expensive.
Yeah.
Private school, boarding schools are expensive. So get involved, and I would say suck the marrow out of the bones of the schools. There are all these opportunities for one to get involved. Don't ignore them. So that doesn't mean you have to be involved in 12 organizations. Pick one or two, but do a deep dive and roll up the sleeves and really get involved, because you learn people skills, organizational skills, you learn about yourself, you're expanding your network, and you're just trying to replicate the real world and trying to get that type of experience in dealing with people. As far as your question is concerned of international, it's really learn about the world. I read The Economist magazine out of London religiously, but read. Not everybody has the opportunity to travel around the world, but if you're interested in international business of whatever that may be, is really know about the world. We Americans are so very ignorant about what's going on in Canada and Mexico, let alone Russia, China, Korea, and Brazil. And so there are big opportunities out there. And, most Americans don't realize that the United States represents 4% of the global population. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's another 96% of human beings that walk the earth. And so for a lot of companies, there's a big opportunity to generate sales revenue and expand their business to different countries.
Yeah. And then what do you think are some characteristics or traits that make someone succeed in a field, either like international business or just in the business field in general?
Excellent people skills. People say, oh, to do international business, I don't speak another language. And I don't think that's all that necessary. You really need to have great people skills to begin with. And so that's how do you relate to other people? How do you listen to other people? Can you sit down and have a dinner full of with a bunch of Russians in Moscow one night and then get on a plane and have dinner and do business with people in Japan the next day? And then a month later, you're in Brazil or Mexico and do the same thing again. So do you have empathy? Do you have that EQ versus IQ? And do you have that global mindset? And so when you're a student, you don't have that opportunity to learn, but you can certainly read and experience and listen about what's going on around the world. So I think it's the first step is just to gain knowledge about what's going on around the world. And then the next step is, okay, am I going to be an accountant? Am I going to be in marketing? And am I going to be in sales? Am I going to be a product developer? Or am I going to be in charge of logistics and operations? What is that specialty? Go find that functional specialty and focus on that. And then hopefully you'll find that opportunity in an organization where you can be responsible for an international business, or if you're so inclined to be posted overseas someday as well.
Mm-hmm. And then, like you mentioned earlier, like how mentorship often can be a key to success. Did you have a mentor when you were throughout your career? And if so, what advice or insights did they share with you that really had a lasting impact?
Yeah, back in the day, Ben, HR departments really didn't have these formalized mentorship programs as they do today or more recently. So it was very much informal, quite frankly. So I had I've had a bunch of people that I've reported to over the years that that they would spend the time to teach you and to share their experiences with you, and those that you ask the questions to. That they would spend the time to explain and share their experiences. Some people won't. And that's okay as well. And I've had as many horrible bosses as I've had great bosses as well. But today in most companies, certainly the larger ones, the HR department will have formalized or formal mentor programs, matching mentor with mentee. So you really got to take advantage upon that, because when you're a young executive, you know nothing.
Yeah.
So you need to fill that void. And that's where anybody that's been working for 10, 20, 30 years, we've just been breathing longer. Yeah. So we do have that benefit of experience. Yes. But it's like, then how do you as a young executive learn from other people? Is that you need to find that formal or informal mentor and build upon that. And what I'm doing right now with the National Association of Asian American Professionals is I do spend a lot of my focus is about sharing my experience and mentoring young executives in our community here in Boston through that organization. So it's a very rewarding thing. But not everybody wants to share. Not everybody wants to do that. So you need to find those people, and it's a matter of knocking on doors.
Yeah. And then for the last question, if you could go back to the beginning of your career, what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Take more risk. Take more risk. Yeah. In your personal life, your professional life, I think when you're a young person, and you starting off with modest means, and you don't have that experience, it's going after that experience, not necessarily, oh, that's a higher paying job or that's a more safe opportunity. I think our parents will want us to take that safe opportunity. I think that's very much ingrained in Asian culture as well, being conservative and taking the safe route of something that's secure and steady. And I understand that completely. That makes a lot of sense. It's very pragmatic. But at the same time, as a young person, I think if going into a new industry, going into a new profession, maybe the pay isn't there, or it's something that's a high flying type of opportunity, or something that's unknown, go off and take that risk. And if you fail, so what? Hopefully you will learn something from it. But I think that would be my advice: is to be bold, be brave, Ben, to go off and take that path that perhaps your parents may or may not want you to take, but that's something that you think, boy, I'm pretty confident, or I want to take that different type of a journey. So that's my path.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was great learning about your journey and the advice you have. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate your time. Great questions.
Thank you.